Welcome to Dead Man Talking. Tonight's story is the finale in this incredible series by a good brother from another mother, RICO. And I just know you guys are going to sink your teeth into this one. Of course, as ever though, please do let us know what you thought down below in the comments box. Please do like and share. Well, it really does help build the channel and our community further. And why not hashtag TeamFEAR and DMT's Cryptid Crew. And so, with that aside, let's get into tonight's story. And title: The Bloodlands. The finale. The Island. Let's get straight into that. Prologue. From one seed comes a great evil. Part 1. A revealing journey. During the trip to the Mediterranean, Bjorn would sleep restlessly on the ship, dreaming of strange images in places where he felt as though he had been before. He had visions of men whom he believed were his companions, and then there were other men, very large, dressed in strange and ancient-looking armor. He couldn't help but have an overwhelming feeling that everything he had experienced thus far was leading him here to some final event. And it was just before sunrise, as the boat docked, and a representative of the church named Diego met them. Bjorn paused and held his head up in the air and sniffed the ocean breeze. Oh, there was a smell in the air that should not be there. It was a smell he recognized from his past. Now, the mysterious island of Yara lay in the distance, barely visible to the naked eye. But Bjorn could see it well, along with the dark, ominous cloud that hung over it. "Please, allow me to take you to meet Father Lorenzo," said Diego. Bjorn and Lizzie were to meet the father at a private location away from the church, and they were ushered to a large stone structure near the docks. Inside awaited the father, with 4 guards and 3 mysterious men standing in the background. "Welcome," said Father Lorenzo. "There is much to discuss, and there are dark times in the Mediterranean. The seed of fear has been planted, and the people are frightened from this feeling of dread that hangs in the air." Now, fog had rolled in every evening for the last several days and hung low over the old cobblestone streets, and some of the church fathers believed that the devil himself was amongst them. A few churches had boarded up their entrances, others had guards, and some had locked their doors altogether. Now, people hurried about in the streets and made sure to be home well before dark. The sounds of children playing was obviously missing, and no birds were singing or chirping in the trees. People looked down as they walked about quickly, not making eye contact or speaking to friends and family. Priests were reluctant to discuss what was going on. The Pope had not ventured out for a month, and strange ships had been seen by fishermen sailing to the island of Yara. Things were unloaded under the cover of darkness on this deserted volcanic island. Animals and people were missing from neighboring islands, and there were no longer any fish in the waters from around the island. And people were nervous because of the mysterious lights seen from the desolate clump of volcanic rock. The church fathers had been keeping an eye on it from afar with a telescope, and had observed a dark cloud start to form over the island and get bigger each day. An eerie red glow faintly illuminated the cloud at night, giving it a even more foreboding look. And the small ship where soldiers were sent to investigate, but they never returned. And after a few days, yet another ship was sent to look for them, and it had not returned either. In the background behind Father Lorenzo stood 3 mysterious men with white cloaks bearing a star and with a cross inside it. Bjorn stared at them and this emblem because it was almost identical to his birthmark. The lead man spoke. "I am Gideon. We are among the last members from the Order of the Holy Temple. We are sworn to protect ancient secrets and fight against evil until the end of times. These are my associates, Aaron and Joel. We stand steadfast with you and the lady, ready to assist you in your quest. We have traveled far, tracking a sinister but well-dressed man from the Middle East, bringing what we believe to be forbidden artifacts to the island on ships." Gideon looked at Bjorn and said, "Please, come with me. I believe we have something that is meant for you." It took both of Gideon's associates to pull a large, ancient-looking shield from the burlap sack. Bjorn instantly saw that The markings upon it were like those on his sword, and his eyes froze on the shield. Then Gideon produced one more item from the large bag. It was a helmet made in the same fashion as the shield. Bjorn paused and spoke. "There is something very familiar about this. I think maybe it was once mine," he said. When Bjorn reached forward his hand for the helmet, there was a small static, like discharge, as he touched it. When he donned the helmet and braced the shield, he instantly fell into a trance-like state. Part 2. Piercing the Veil. Let's get straight into that. The stoic Bjorn now stood silent like a statue as he gripped his sword and held the shield at the ready against his chest. It started to shimmer just as his sword did the first time he had held it. A pale blue light now emanated from around him. Lizzie suggested that they all move back a few steps. Bjorn's head tilted forward, and it was as if he was transported out of his body to another place and time. Suddenly, he was surrounded by other men who were adorned in a similar fashion to him. Adoniel was there and looked at him with a nod. They were inside a tremendous cavern in the bowels of the earth. There were thin layers of smoke suspended in the air, and the smell of sulphur hung heavy. The other large men advanced slowly but deliberately forward, ahead of him with shields raised and swords in hand. And as they trod deeper into this hellish place, Adoniel leaned into Bjorn's ear and said, "This is a test from your past, and it is a reminder of what lies ahead of you." Bjorn was anxious but not afraid, and somehow he knew that he had been here before. A pale rainbow of colours now began to emanate from the men in front of him, giving a hazy air and unearthly hue. In the distance, a wave of unnatural, blood-curdling screams erupted that echoed throughout the cave. The terrifying sounds were now rapidly approaching and becoming deafening. The men in front abruptly formed a wedge with their shields and held their swords at the ready over the shields. Bjorn followed suit as he saw that Adoniel was now 3 strides in front of him. Suddenly, a wave of deformed dark shapes slammed into the shield wall in front of him, with a sound like thunder vibrating the cavern around him. Out of his peripheral vision, Bjorn noticed carvings on the cave wall, depicting all sorts of hellish creatures. Under the carvings was what looked like some sort of makeshift stone altar. Ahead, a hideous cacophony of vile man-like creatures, resembling a combination of goats, serpents, and lions poured over the men, while they skewered and beheaded monster after monster. Some of the creatures even had tentacles like sea creatures. Adoniel now began cutting them down as they swiped their claws and snapped their huge sharp teeth. And suddenly, Bjorn was in the fight of his life as he sent several creatures now surrounding him on all sides. He slammed his shield into one creature whilst thrusting his sword up into the gut of another and flung it onto the ground. He whirled around and began slashing and beheading the beasts one after the other. He sliced and hacked at the creatures as they fell one by one. The grotesque bodies were now starting to pile up around him. When the next thing he knew, he was awake and standing back in front of Lizzie and the 3 strangers. "What happened?" said Lizzie. Bjorn paused and told him how he was transported to a place deep inside the earth, fighting hideous monsters with Adoniel and other Gregori. "It was like I had been there before, when I was reliving this experience." Gideon spoke up and said, "It was a large and mysterious man who came to us at the temple, with a bundle containing the shield and helmet. He knew we were about to depart on our quest for the Mediterranean. He said that we would meet a man whom this belonged." Bjorn nodded and said, "Yes, that man was the same man in my vision." Gideon announced that it was now time to set sail for the short trip to the mysterious island of Yara, and he feared that we must prepare for an ancient evil. "We have brought weapons procured from holy sites, weapons that hold great power." "Very well," said Bjorn. "Let us set sail." During the journey, Bjorn decided to sprout his wings and fly ahead to investigate the island. He would return and tell them where to beach the boat. Upon arriving at the island, the air was heavy, and at times it felt hard for Lizzie and the knights to breathe. They tied the boat off on a boulder and proceeded over the rocky shoreline. Human remains were scattered about, no doubt those of the soldiers sent to investigate. They observed many caves and caverns on the island. There appeared a very large cave that had obviously been unsealed. Once inside this huge cave entrance, they observed that it had contained many strange carvings on the wall, depicting men of huge stature. And Gideon said, "Legend held that this was once home to a race of giants." And at that instant, the ground slightly rumbled from under their feet. Echoing sounds like loud whispers filled their ears. Gideon said that ancient burial sites in the Mideast had been opened and raided, and they feared their contents had been brought here for evil purposes. Several ships carrying huge crates with ancient markings had been seen by fishermen from nearby islands. Gideon, Joel, and Aaron retrieved glass bottles of flammable liquid in slings, along with spears and arrows having etchings like Bjorn's sword and similar armor. Then Gideon pointed down into the cave and said, "Look, the crates are there inside the cave, and signs that they were recently opened." Bjorn observed even more ancient but familiar carvings on the cave wall. "This is an ancient dwelling place of the damned," he said. And as the five further inspected the cave, a rumbling sound came from deep within. Part 3. Horror Revealed. They quickly backed down to the entrance of the cave as a sea of ghoulish creatures emerged from the darkness, running about on all fours. Their legs bent macabrely forward at the knees, allowing them to scamper around like large, disfigured spiders. They were pale white with black eyes and had huge round mouths full of razor-sharp teeth. And when they opened their jaws, their mouths extended from their chins to their foreheads. Now Lizzie and the knights fired arrows and lit the fuses on the glass firebombs, slinging them at the creatures. Unearthly, ear-piercing screeches erupted as the abominations were engulfed in flames. Whatever was in these bottles was more than just simple lamp oil, as the creatures practically exploded into balls of flame on contact. Bjorn swept down, cleaving a beast in half. One jumped onto his back and he flung it into the path of the others, running towards Lizzie and the knights, causing them to get tripped up. Gideon and his men drew swords and began dispatching them, but two of the creatures jumped onto Joel's back, ripping and tearing at him with their claws and teeth, and pulling chunks of flesh from his neck and shoulders before Gideon and Aaron could behead them. The remaining handful of the monsters converged on them as Lizzie drew her swords and hacked away, standing back to back with Gideon and Aaron. Bjorn landed next to them, cutting two creatures in half instantly. Lizzie ran one sword up through the throat of one and swung sideways her other sword, laying wide the throat of yet another, as Gideon and Aaron vanquished the last two. They ran to check on Joel, but he was already dead. Most of his throat was missing. And as the four bowed with Gideon saying a prayer, the sound of applause was heard coming from within the cave. A sneering, maniacal voice said, "Bravo! It appears you have killed my little pets." They turned to see a handsome man looking like royalty, dressed in the finest of clothes. It was Lucian, Satan's spawn, the son of perdition. How appropriate that I finally get to meet the two who so aptly killed my centurions and their followers. And look, one is no less a junior Grigori. The other reeks of my servant, Vostok. How is that possible? The ancient order of the Temple Knights are even here. But worry not. Your suffering will be short-lived, when my servants come to make quick work of you. And then, from the shallow darkness behind Lucian, a steady thud, 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 came as several large shadowy figures started to emerge. One by one, giant men emerged dressed in an ancient manner, wearing battle armor. They ranged from 8 to 10 feet tall in height and looked as if their skin was partially decayed. In places, you could see bones under the decayed flesh, and they gave off a foul stench that seemingly came from the pits of hell. Lucian proudly bowed and spoke again, saying, "Lady and gentlemen, please allow me to introduce Anikael and Og Yavesh of the Amorites, Rav Kanan and Binobel of the Canaanites, Moabil and Basharil of the Moabites, Saf Algob and Gath Lami of the Philistines, and Rapha-Pharat, protector of the great Pharaoh. My father reanimated these giants with the ancient dark fire of life for a second chance to rule. And you two who killed my centurions will pay a price. After these great warriors have trampled your remains, I will sail these mighty Raphim to the shores of the mainland, where the worms of the church dwell. By sunrise they will bow to me and him who begat me, the brightest spirit of all. And before another sun rises, I will transform them into ghoulish servants like those you just slaughtered. Lizzie and the knights felt uneasy and off balance, as if these giants were emanating a force that caused them slight nausea in the pit of their stomachs. Then, from behind Lucian came a series of low, guttural snarling growls, and only what could be described as 3 hellhounds with glowing red eyes surrounding his feet. They had spikes on their backs, and their shoulders came above waist level on Lucian. Their teeth were long and razor sharp and were coloured a dirty yellow-brown, and with a smelly saliva dripping from their mouths. Their breaths were hot, and steam emanated from their muzzles as they snarled. Lucian screamed, "Damn you all to hell!" And Gideon then responded, "That is the domain in which you shall dwell, not us." Part 4. The Showdown. Let's get straight into that. The giants began to advance, stepping in front of Lucian. Bjorn and the largest giant, Henrikael, squared off. He stood over 10 feet tall and threw a boulder at Bjorn, but he dodged it and leapt in, striking the behemoth's thigh with his sword. Henrikael screamed out a roar that shook the surrounding rocks. A gaping hole exposed bone, and a black smelly clotted liquid oozed out from the gash. The giant swung his mighty sword, striking Bjorn's shield and knocking him to the ground. Bjorn tumbled backwards instantly, coming to his feet in a ready position. Courageous Lizzie pulled an arrow after arrow from her quiver and shot the blessed warheads towards the hulking men. The 8-foot-tall Gath Lami screamed, "Woman, I am descended from Goliath of Gath, and this day you will lay with me." Lizzie responded, "Goliath lost his head, and so shall you." She fired an arrow, striking his thigh, causing him to scream out in pain. The arrow seemed to be having a moderate effect, but the flames caused the giants great pain. Gideon and Aaron emerged from behind Lizzie, firing arrows and lighting more firebombs. The giants were quite sensitive to the fire, and Saf Al-Gob erupted into flames and ran towards the ocean. But the giants moved with great speed and agility and were hard to hit. The battle between Bjorn and Henrikael raged on, now with a great sword battle. Henrikael had suffered a serious wound to his leg from Bjorn's sword, and was now on the defensive. The 10-foot giant was stronger and swung his huge sword with great force, but Bjorn would block, sidestep, and slice Henrikael with his sword, which now glimmered with a blue flame. And seeing that their comrade was now losing, Binabail, Moabil, and Basharil began to run towards Henrikael. Suddenly Bjorn was struck from behind by a large club with spikes wielded by Moabil, who stood almost as tall as Henrikael. The remainder of the giants now moved against Lizzie and the knights, throwing huge stones that narrowly missed them. Gideon and Aaron managed to set another giant on fire, and the hulking Rapha-Pharat ran for the sea to quench the flames. But the onslaught of the giants continued, and Og-Yavesh quickly emerged from behind Aaron, picking him up and slamming him into the ground with a sickening thud. And with all the strength Aaron had left, he fired one more arrow, striking the 9-foot-tall giant in the face. But it wasn't enough to stop the hulking Og-Yavesh from stomping its giant foot into Aaron's chest. Now only Lizzie and Gideon stood alone, facing Gath Lami, Rav Kanan, and the wounded Og-Yavesh. Suddenly, the severely burned Rapha-Pharat and Saf Al-Gob emerged from the sea with great rage after extinguishing their flamed flesh. They rushed out of the surf with lumps of burnt flesh falling onto the rocky ground. They held their huge battle axes over their heads as they charged forward, with only one focus, and that was exacting their revenge against Lizzie and Gideon. Bjorn was now airborne, dodging small boulders, while Lizzie was down to the last of her remaining arrows, and Gideon was lighting the last of the firebombs. Suddenly, there was a crack of thunder and lightning that struck the ground 50 or 60 feet behind the oncoming giants. 3 shafts of brilliant blue light hit the ground with such force and knocked the giants off balance. As the dust and smoke cleared, 3 large figures stood near the shoreline with hoods of their cloaks obscuring their faces. The warm, humid air now felt cold, and the chill was felt by the giants. They turned and stood motionless, staring at these figures who were now quite visible. They wore armor and held shields like Bjorn's, and they suddenly produced giant swords and threw back their cloaks. It was Adonio, and 2 men even larger than him. Wings abruptly emerged from their backs, and they shot forward towards the giants. 2 of them went towards Lizzie and Gideon, and Adonio went towards Bjorn. Rafa Ferrat and Safar Gob squared off to meet the 2 Gregori, and both lost their heads in a flash. Adonio rushed forward towards Benabil, Moabil taking a blow from Benabil's sword on his shield, and blocking an overhead attack from Moabil's spiked club with his glowing sword. Moabil froze and looked down at the stump of what was once his sword, only a second before. Adonio wasted no time and spun around, taking Moabil's head. Adonio turned his attention to the stunned Benabil, who rushed towards him. Part 5. Fire, Steel, and Decision. The 2 Gogori who joined Lizzie and Gideon now faced off against Rav Kanan and Ogyavesh as Gathlami glared with rage at Lizzie. Gideon lit his last firebomb and threw it at Gathlami's feet. When it fell short, the giant opened his huge mouth and laughed, saying, "Beautiful, weak human!" Then Lizzie took her remaining arrow and fired it right into the giant's open mouth. He staggered backwards, screaming in a thunderous manner, and Sathar Gob and Rafa Ferrat were engaged in a sword fight with the 2 Gogori, and were being slashed to pieces. Bjorn and Basharil were now locked into a sword battle as Anakael stumbled to his feet and with blood streaming from the huge gash in his leg. And as Gathlami pulled the arrow out of his mouth, Gideon distracted him from the front, while Lizzie quickly came from behind, jumping onto the giant's back. She struck one of her swords deep into his neck, causing him to fling her off as if she was a small child, and she landed hard onto the ground. Gathlami stumbled forward to his knees, and Gideon rushed forward with his sword and shouted, "For Aaron and Joe!" and severed the behemoth's head. As this was happening, Ogyavesh and Rav Kanan went out on their knees, bleeding profusely from numerous wounds, as the 2 Gogori stood over them. With 2 swings in unison, they took their heads. Benabil now slumped to his knees, missing his right arm from the elbow down. He held his shield up to block Adonio's blow, but the blade split his shield down the middle, along with the giant's forearm. He fell forward onto his chest, and Adonio took his head. Bjorn now battled the giant Basharil, who stood 2 heads taller, but Bjorn fought fiercely, blocking and countering, making cuts to the giant's midsection and legs. And finally, Basharil became angry and careless, and swung his sword, overextending himself. When he did, Bjorn plunged his sword up through its heart, and the blade came out his back with a thick dark blood dripping off of it. And Akael stumbled forwards and swung his sword down on Bjorn, with his back still turned. Lizzie screamed, but Bjorn had already begun to react. He turned about quickly, blocking the blow with his shield, and buried his blade deep into the bowels of the giant. He took his foot and kicked the giant back off his blade, and its body made a loud thud as it struck the ground on the rocky shoreline at Adonio's feet, where he quickly severed its head. All attention was now turned to Lucien, standing in the cave entrance behind his hellhounds. There was a look of fear upon his face that slowly turned into a sneering grin as the 3 hounds crouched and snarled while whimpering a bit Now, Adonio and his two companions approached. Lucian spoke. "I see your master sent you after me." And Adonio's booming voice spoke. "Your mischief is done. You will be bound in the earth along with the other sons of perdition." The three hellhounds suddenly leapt forward at the three Gogori, who caught them in the midair, snapping their necks. The hounds fell to the ground, instantly bursting into flames. Adonio produced a set of chains and handed them to Chamuel and Kemuel as they bound Lucian. He screamed, "The Most High can only bind me for a season. I shall return!" And the huge shaft of light struck the ground where Lucian and the two Gogori stood. When the cloud of smoke and dust dissipated, they were gone. Adonio turned to Gideon and bowed his head, saying, "Well done, good servant. Today your men will have great reward." Gideon nodded, and Bjorn said, "And what now for Lizzie and I?" And Adonio responded, "You have passed your test, my young brother. Today you must make an important choice. You may choose between continuing your service as a Gregori with the highest honor, or you may choose to be but a man again who can have a family." And Bjorn looked puzzled as Lizzie drew near. "And you, dear Lizzie, have fought nobly, and today all vestiges of Vostok's malfeasance will be removed from you." And Bjorn and Lizzie looked to each other in great wonder at what Adonio had said. Adonio now drew close and looked directly at Bjorn and Lizzie. "Should you both choose your previous lives, you will retain some of your abilities. For once obtained, some gifts are like burdens which cannot be discarded. You can be like any other man or woman and have a family, but you will always be stronger, more aware, and retain the hearts and senses of true warriors. Should you choose this, we will be looking over you until that day when you are again needed to serve the great cause." Bjorn looked at Lizzie and said, "What will you choose?" And she held his hand and said, "I once told you my heart would always be yours." Bjorn looked at Adonio and said, "We choose each other." "So be it," said Adonio. "You will keep your cloak and sword for that day when we call upon you. But for now, have a life and have love together. Raise strong children in the way your father raised you, and teach them about the ancient ways." Adonio placed his hand on their foreheads, and for only a second they closed their eyes. When they opened them again, Adonio was gone. Bjorn and Lizzie felt different. Gideon said, "Come, children, let me arrange passage back home for you. You have earned it." And with that, they prepared their return home to their land to spend their lives together. As their ship sailed home, Bjorn sat silent at the bow of the ship, looking up into the night sky. Lizzie knelt next to him, saying, "Your thoughts appear deep, my dear." Bjorn responded, "My love, you look different, youthful but mature. You are surrounded by millions of stars, but yet you shine." Then Lizzie responded, "You look almost like my youthful Bjorn, but in the body of a wiser man who had suffered many trials." "Yes," said Bjorn, "but I feel our best trials are ahead." As he stood to embrace her, they embraced and stared up into the clear night sky as the ship gently rocked and swayed. They were headed home, where their journey had begun. Epilogue. The path home is paved with great sacrifice. Wow. Wow. Certainly another one. Wow. What a wonderfully romantic, action-packed and absolutely gripping story there from the one and only and incredible mind of RICO. A huge thank you, RICO, for this incredible addition to your collection of stories. As I said many times before, each and every story you produce is absolutely first class and original. It's such a gripping read. I hope you are well and had a fantastic Christmas with friends and family, and are looking forward to an even better new year. And I can't wait for your next adventure. Well, guys and girls, Rico's going to take a little break from all this writing, as he's been knocking out story after story for almost a year or two now. But I'm sure as much as you, I do hope he will return to the channel refreshed and with more adventures for us all to enjoy. As ever, please do let us know what you thought down below in the comments box. Please do like and share. It really does help both the channel and our community further. Why not hashtag TeamFEAR and DMT's Cryptid Crew. If you have a story to share with us on the channel or would just like to get in touch with me, then please do so at the contact email, which is as on screen. contactthedeadone@gmail.com. I really look forward to hearing from you. I hope you had a marvellous Merry Christmas with friends and family, good food and even better drink, full of love, laughter and light. And you're looking forward to a brand new year where we can hit the ground running and maybe start chasing that dream that you've always had on the back burner. Whatever it is that you do, I hope you're enjoying it and are giving it your all. But above all, guys, remember, be safe, not sorry.